Hi there. I'm here today with one of the weirdest geckos in the whole world. It's weird for a gecko, and then it's just weird in general. It's such a cool lizard, and this is an Australian knob-tailed gecko. It's weird for a gecko in that it doesn't have any toe pads and that it can close its eyes and then open them. Most geckos can't do this. Most geckos can only clean their eyes, for example, by licking their eyeballs. And most geckos have some sort of toe pads that they can use to walk right up glass. These guys have neither of these things, so that's pretty weird for a gecko. But then they're just generally weird animals. Let's start at the front and just work our way forward. They've kind of got the head of a viper. Like a viper snake, except lumpier, with ears and with big old googly eyes that can blink. But it is kind of a viperish head, and they've got these weird lumps all over their body, which are actually not that uncommon for desert geckos. And then they've got tails. They're called knob-tailed geckos for a reason, and their tails are so weird and knobby. And then they've kind of got these big gangly legs out to the side, which actually bothered our camera woman Michelle so much that she couldn't even stand to film them anymore. Which, I mean, what a weirdo gecko. I love them. But they are actually pretty great pets. So not only are they weird, but they're very, very reasonable to keep. We give the knob-tailed gecko a score of 3.4 out of 5, which is a decent score, but not as high as you might be expecting, considering I just told you they're so great. And I want to explain how they get that score, and that comes down to our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give them a score of 4 out of 5. Really, these geckos are not going to do you any harm at all. They're not going to run away from you. They're probably not going to bite you. They're not going to scratch you. They pose no threat to you. Really, the only reason they lose any points at all is because you pose some threat to them. They're small, they're fragile, and they can get stressed with excessive handling, which is why I'm not handling this one for the duration of this video. They are, when you want to handle them, about as handleable as a leopard gecko. It's just you shouldn't handle them as long as you can handle a leopard gecko without stressing them out. They're not going to hold on to you as well as a lot of the arboreal geckos because they're not built for holding on like an arboreal gecko. They can drop that tail, and if you stress them out too much, it sounds like they will do that. Some of them regrow it and some of them don't, depending on the exact species of knob-tailed gecko that you have. So I would not recommend handling them excessively, but it is okay to handle them some, and that's pretty good. When it comes to care, we give the knob-tailed gecko a score of 4 out of 5. There is some variation between species, especially with regard to how much humidity there should be in the enclosure. So an important thing is that you're aware of which species you have. The nice thing is that these guys, because they're all captive bred, being an Australian gecko, that's one of the great things about Australian wildlife. It's kind of a bummer too sometimes, is that they don't export anything out of Australia anymore. So everything in the pet trade is captive bred. And that's wonderful. It does mean that we don't get access to all of the amazing Australian wildlife, but Australia is a really special place, and I'm glad that they're keeping it that way. Given that they're all captive bred, the breeder from which you buy your specific knob-tailed gecko should definitely know which species they're selling to you. They do need to eat a variety of different insects. The nice thing is they'll eat about anything that moves. They're really good about that. They are a very movement-oriented predator, though. So if things like mealworms might not move around enough to draw their attention, whereas things like crickets and Dubia roaches, those kind of things, they'll be very excited about those. The best way to get them water, and these guys do need some water, is going to be through misting. You're going to want to mist a few times a week so there are some droplets that they can lap up. You definitely don't want the enclosure to remain wet. That wouldn't be ideal for these guys, but that's the best way to get them water. You can try putting a water bowl in there. They may drink from it like leopard geckos will, but there's a very good chance that they won't. They also need a hot spot in their enclosure Being a nocturnal gecko, I wouldn't recommend using lights of any kind to achieve this. An under tank heater would probably be the best way to get that heat, and just make sure you have that on a thermostat. You should be good to go. But overall, care on these geckos is really very easy. The main frequent maintenance that you'll need to do is just going to be misting, and that's not even daily, which makes these very, very reasonable to care for. When it comes to hardiness, we give them a score of 4 out of 5. Again, they're all captive bred, which means all of the issues that we've discussed actually in this video about wild caught and import reptiles, you're not going to deal with those with a knob-tailed gecko, and that's marvelous. They are, however, small and delicate, so you hurting them is actually probably the biggest danger and the biggest threat to these guys. As long as you don't physically harm them, though, they are pretty tough, and so with the right care, they should do really well for you. They do have a somewhat shorter lifespan than comparable geckos like leopard geckos or fat-tailed geckos or crested geckos, but they still can live up to about a decade, and so that is a long time, and it's possible they could live longer than that, but it's shorter than some geckos. When it comes to availability, we give them a score of 2 out of 5. Like I said, they're all captive bred, and they're not quite as easy to breed as a lot of geckos. Geckos are kind of notorious for being easy to breed, and these guys are not quite as easy to breed. They are, however, almost always available online. So, you know, if you're willing to ship one to your house, you can probably find one. They will occasionally be available at expos. That's probably the only place that you'd ever see them outside of a breeder. However, we're very fortunate in that this gecko comes to us from Animal Ark in Orem, Utah, which is just one of the spectacular pet stores that exists. We've talked about it before. You know, there are great pet stores and there are lousy pet stores. Animal Ark in Orem, Utah is a great pet store, and exciting for us, they have amazing things like knob-tailed geckos, occasionally available. It's something you can see in a pet store, rarely, expos, sometimes. Breeder, though, that's going to be your best source for a knob-tailed gecko. When it comes to upfront costs, we give knob-tailed geckos a score of 3 out of 5. The gecko itself is fairly expensive. I said they're all captive bred, and they're a little bit difficult to breed, and there aren't that many people breeding them, so it's an expensive gecko. It's one of the more expensive geckos that you'll find. Not up there with like a chewy or a lychee, but expensive nonetheless. Everything that you'll need for them, though, after you buy the gecko is fairly inexpensive. The tank is not huge because they're not huge, but they will use the space if you get them a bigger enclosure. Sand is actually a really great substrate, and I recommend like real sand, not calcium sand. In an earlier video, we actually posted a picture of calcium sand. I didn't realize it was calcium sand when we selected it. Calcium sand has one major issue, which is just they're often prone to eating a lot of it. In the wild, when they find calcium, you know, they tend to eat it. They'll lick at it, and that's excellent because they need sources of calcium. But when they have just an abundance of calcium always there, they will sometimes get too much of it, and they'll just swallow a bunch of sand, and that can lead to a lot of digestive issues and even death. So I wouldn't recommend calcium sand. Just get regular sand for them. They'll also need a heat mat. That's the best way to get the temperature you'll need, and just make sure you control that with a thermostat. But there is no need for lights of any kind. That includes UVA, UVB. You shouldn't really need that for these guys because they're a nocturnal gecko, and that's awesome. And again, all the things you need, we'll have links to those things down in the description. Overall, we give the knob-tailed gecko a score of 3.4 out of 5. Hopefully you can see why they get that score. These guys are super cool geckos. They are expensive to buy, but after that, I mean, it's a very reasonable and a very unusual pet. Even your reptile friends, your weirdo reptile friends, even they're going to want to see your knob-tailed geckos because what a strange beast. As always, like and subscribe. We hope to see you real soon. And thank you very much, all of you that are supporting us on Patreon. But, woo! Good jump, buddy. Get you down here so you can calm down.
I don't like him. I don't like him at all.
What is wrong with his tail? It's like fat and then nothing.
I don't like it. It looks like a spider gecko. It's freaky little spindly legs. This
Look
is
at that,
disgusting.
that back right leg is weird.
He's gonna have a complex after this.
Yeah, I don't like Ken at all. Ew, I don't like it when he moves. This isn't right.
Do you want me to do the B-roll?
Ew.
Do you want me to do the B-roll? Alright, looks like I'm doing
I
B-roll.
can't do it. Why is that bothering me? I like
don't know.
spiders.
Should we go to full right?
It's disgusting when you have to get him moving. It's nasty looking. It's freaky looking. Something's not right about him. The crazy thing is, I love spiders. I don't know what it is about him that puts me off. Something doesn't look right in a lot of different ways. He's just not right in a lot of ways.